Creeping Crimson by Michael Marks. The Hedges Motel and Motor Lodge was the kind of tucked-away place you don't find on purpose. It's not mentioned in any roadside guides or travel pamphlets, it doesn't advertise, and it doesn't have a web page for booking. In fact, if you blink as you make the turn around the bend where it's nestled, you'll miss it altogether. That being said, it's not at all an unpleasant-looking place. A single-story motel and restaurant built with the aesthetic of a log cabin. It sits nestled in a surrounding forest of sweet-smelling redwood and pine, and when mixed with the scent of rain, like when I went in, it seems downright heavenly. The burnt orange of the tree bark surrounding the stained wood buildings stands out, even when darkened by the rain and dim light of dusk. Yet a sinister tone can be felt and glimpsed if you're looking hard enough. The red sign reading vacancy casts its light on the surrounding area, giving the sap leaking from the redwoods the tone of blood seeping from open wounds. When my wife and I made the turn that brought that place into our view, I was already road-weary. We had plans to meet some friends of ours at a cabin. It was getting late, and we'd already been on the road for a long time, with plenty of miles left to go. I should have kept driving, no matter the miles between me and sleep. I should have just kept on going down the winding road and on to my destination. My empty stomach and heavy eyes had other plans, though, and I pulled into its parking lot. I wish I would have blinked. Are you sure you want to get me a room? You want to get a room? I mean, I could just take over driving while you get some sleep, my wife Helen said. I answered her before I spoke by putting the car in park and shutting off the engine. I'm exhausted and hungry, and honestly, I just want a real bed for a night. I smiled and leaned back in my seat, rubbing my hands over my face before continuing. Besides, it's getting dark and pouring rain. On these roads, I'd rather not chance it. Helen sighed. I suppose you're right. She looked out of her window and up toward the sky, as if diagnosing the weather. I hope it clears up a bit by morning. A quick flash of lightning filled the air, and thunder rolled above our heads. I think that's the weather gods saying no. I smiled and grabbed my jacket from the back seat. I'll get us a room. I shook the rain from my jacket and stepped into the lobby. A portly, older man behind the counter looked up from his portable television to greet me with a cheery smile. He groaned as he got to his feet and composed himself by straightening his flannel shirt and running his fingers through his thin, silver hair before speaking. "Good evening, young fella." He dropped his hands to the counter and leaned toward me as I approached. "What can I do for you?" "Hey there. I'm gonna need a room for two. I'm gonna need a room for two for the night." I smiled back and took in the decor. A fireplace burned in the other corner of the room, and everything still had that log cabin charm inside. I could smell brewing coffee, and that added to the warmth of the place. "Sign in here." The old man plopped a huge register down on the counter and held a pen out toward me. The ledger was full of names, but only two above mine had the same date. "Busy night?" I asked, half joking, and hoping the jovial tone came across in my tired voice. "Couple others. A family with a couple of kids, and them other fellas." He looked past my shoulder, like he was looking for someone as I leaned down to sign. "Between you and me, I think them other two might be a little light in the loafers, if you catch my meaning." He whispered and met my eyes with a slow nod. I chuckled, a bit caught off guard by his antiquated turn of phrase. He stood straight up, looked over my shoulder again, and then limply flicked his wrist down as if to further explain. His eyes flicked around the lobby as if he were going to be caught making his gesture, and a hint of worry crept up behind his otherwise cheery face. "Yeah," I handed him back the pen as I finished writing my name. "How's the coffee in your restaurant?" "Better than what we got here in the lobby. I'll tell you that much." He grabbed the register and put it back under the front desk. Reached behind, he reached behind him and moved his hand along a row of keys before plucking one off and handing it to me. "Room 1C. Enjoy your stay, Mr. He paused to lean down beneath the front desk and read my name off the register. Mr. Gamble? Call me Tom, I said, taking the key from him and putting it in my coat pocket. Mr. Gamble never really suited me. The old man laughed heartily at my statement, as if he were in on some joke that went over my head. Well, Tom, if you need anything, just call the front desk and ask for Otis. He pointed a pudgy thumb at his chest with pride. I nodded and thanked him. As I headed back into the rain, I looked back only once and saw him return to his seat and watching his little TV with a satisfied smile. After dropping our things off in the room, my wife and I went to the restaurant. It was little more than a dining counter being worked by one man who served as both waiter and cook, but it would do. As we took our seats, we saw the family Otis had mentioned, a little further down the counter. The father, a man in his late 30s, wearing a polo shirt and broad pants during a thunderstorm, nodded to me as we sat down. His daughter was running around with her arms outstretched, making plain sounds as her parents focused on their cheeseburgers. She's adorable. Helen put her hand on my shoulder and looked over at the little girl with a smile. The girl noticed and became suddenly shy, hiding behind her mother's legs. Helen waved at her anyway and took a seat next to me as I looked over the laminated menu. Sorry, she's shy, the girl's mother chimed in with a soft voice. She too was late in her 30s and far more appropriately dressed for the weather in a heavy jacket and jeans. Say hi to the lady, Lydia Beans. Lydia Beans poked her head out briefly from behind her mother's legs and waved before retreating. It was an act so adorable that even in my tired and half-starved state, it made me smile. Hi, sweetheart, Helen said, looking across me at the little girl before switching her attention back to the mother. How old is she? Lydia is 6. She looked down at her daughter as she spoke. The little girl stuck her head out again, realizing that she was now the focus of the adult's attention. And a half, she chimed in. And a smart aleck. Sit down and eat your grilled cheese, Lydia Beans. Daddy Broadshorts chimed in. How are you folks doing tonight? A gruff voice suddenly came from in front of us, as I looked up to see a gaunt, bearded man in a greasy apron, now standing there as if by magic. What can I get you? Coffee and a burger is fine. Hon? I tapped Helen on the shoulder, and she broke her gaze from the little girl long enough to react. Oh, I'll just have the same. You got it. The cook shuffled back into the kitchen just as the family was finishing up their food. My wife and I said good night to them as they passed, and they wished us the same. Lydia turned around as she stepped out the door and waved goodbye to us before throwing on the hood of her jacket and extending her arms out like plane wings once again as she ran into the rain with her parents. After dinner, we headed back to the room. I took a nice long shower and Helen laid back on the bed, clicking through the channels. When my shower was over and I was getting dressed, I noticed I could hear the family from the restaurant talking in the next room. Pretty clearly, too, considering they were talking at normal volume. Can you believe how thin these walls are? I said to Helen as I stepped out of the bathroom in a cloud of steam. I know, right? She said. Her eyes looked behind me, noticing how fogged up the bathroom was. Jesus, do you take a shower or create a sauna? There's no vent in there, no window either. I tossed my towel and rummaged through my bag for my cigarettes and lighter. Guess we're going to have to skip the sex tonight. What does a bathroom window have to do with that? She said with a confused laugh. No, you goofball, because of the walls. I found my cigarettes and Zippo finally, and zipped my bag up. I turned toward my wife with a smile and held them up in offering. No, I don't feel like getting up. She splayed out taking up as much of the bed as possible and closed her eyes. Hurry back, though. Sex is still on the table. We just have to be really, really deathly quiet. Maybe they sleep with earplugs, I said. I heard my wife laugh as I stepped out beneath the overhang in front of the line of rooms and closed the door behind me. I sat in a chair by the ice machine and held my cigarette. The storm continued to pound down on the little roadside motel and the red light from the vacancy sign made it look like blood was falling from the sky. My attention was drawn to the other end of the walkway as someone stepped out of 1A and started heading my direction. He nodded and raised one hand in a wave as he approached. In the other, he had an ice bucket. "Hey there," he said as he stepped past and opened the ice machine. "Hey, how you doing tonight?" I took another drag of my cigarette and blew it out into the streaks of red rain. "Pretty good." He set down his filled ice bucket and looked at my cigarette with longing. "Would you mind if I have one of those?" I reached my pack out to him, and he took one. I lit it for him as he sucked in a deep drag with a look of long-lost satisfaction. My boyfriend is always on my case to quit, but nothing beats that after a long day. "Amen," I agreed. "So, are you here with your boyfriend?" "Yep." He took another drag and scratched his stubble. "We were just talking about how paper-thin these walls are." "No shit," I agreed. "My wife and I were just saying the same thing. It's nuts." "Why do you think they stuck us all together like this? I mean, we have to be the only 3 rooms booked. Why would they put us all right next to each other?" "I don't know." I twirled the cigarette in my hand while I thought. "Maybe it's easier for the cleaning service. No one around here looked too spry." "Yeah, maybe." He trailed off, clearly thinking deeper about it. "My name's David, by the way." "I'm Tom." I shook his hand and finished my cigarette. "Hey, I found a good movie playing." I heard someone call from the walkway. I looked to see a man peeking his head out of David's room. "Did you get the ice?" "Wait, are you smoking?" "Busted," I said with a laugh. "Yeah, I guess so." David flicked his cigarette out into the storm and grabbed his ice bucket. "Guess I better get back. Good to meet you, Tom." "You too," I responded, rising from my chair. David ran off to his room, and I could hear his boyfriend on his case before he even reached the door. I went back to my room, more than ready to lie down and finally get some sleep. I hadn't been asleep an hour when I woke up to the sound of a PA system kicking on with a screech. My wife and I both sat up in bed, confused as hell as to what was happening. But before we could even get our bearings, the chanting started. It droned out of some unseen speaker and filled the room. The words weren't English. In fact, they weren't any language I recognized. The voice speaking them was low and weighty, drawing out each sound as it was made. "What the fuck is that?" I shouted, getting out of my bed and hunting around the room. I could hear the family next door waking up too. The voice echoed from the room as well, and I realized Daddy Broadshorts was doing exactly what I was doing, only with more expletives. I looked over at Helen, who had already picked up the phone and had it to her ear. "Shit! There's no dial tone." She slammed the receiver down and got out of bed, rushing over to her purse while I continued to hunt for where the sound was coming from. It was reverberating around the room, making it hard to track down. I went to flick on a light to help in the search, but nothing happened. "Are you kidding me? Power's out too." I slipped my jeans on and got ready to storm to the front desk, cheering Mr. Otis exactly what the fuck was going on. "No cell phone signal either," Helen said. Helen held her phone up to me as if I wouldn't believe her. I could hear Daddy Broadshorts next door slamming against something, an expletive following each hit. Further down, I could hear David or his partner yelling something I couldn't make out. "Stay here. I'm gonna find out what the fuck is going on." I reached out for the knob, but it wouldn't turn. I shouldered against the door, but it felt sealed shut. It was like slamming against a brick wall. "What are you doing?" Helen came to my side and watched me press pointlessly against the door. "It's locked. It's fucking locked." I gave up and stepped away from the door, frustrated. "What do you mean it's locked? How is it locked?" Helen started to check for herself, but I didn't bother to stop her. "I mean it's locked from the outside or something. It won't fucking open." "Well, grab the key." "There's no keyhole on the inside of the door, Helen." I turned the lock and the deadbolt already. "This thing isn't budging." I flipped over a chair, even more frustrated. "You guys are locked in too?" I heard Daddy Broadshorts yell through the wall. "What the hell is going on?" "No idea," I yelled back. Are the guys on the other side of you locked in too?" "Yeah," he responded, and I heard him move away from the wall. The chanting felt like it was boring its way into my skull. In a fit of anger, I grabbed one of the chairs and threw it against the window as hard as I could. The chair simply bounced off and landed upside down next to the bed, so I picked it up and started slamming it against the window as hard as I could. I could hear my wife screaming at me, but didn't care. I didn't like feeling trapped, and it was driving me insane fast. I needed out of that room. On the fourth hit, the chair shattered into pieces, and not a mark was left on the window. It's bulletproof. Helen walked over and touched the glass. It's bulletproof fucking glass, Tom. Why does a hotel have bulletproof windows? I opened my mouth to say, I don't know, yet again, but my response was cut short by the sound of someone screaming bloody murder. Not screaming in anger or frustration, like me and Daddy Broadshorts had been, but screaming in pure agony. What's going on? I shouted through the wall. I could hear the little girl Lydia crying on the other side, and beyond her, the sounds of screams and cries for help. I don't know, said more sensible Mommy. Jesus, it sounds like someone is killing them in there. Teddy is trying to see it from the window. I figured Ted must be Daddy Broadshorts' real name. I walked away from the wall and peeked out through the window. I did my best to crane my neck at an odd angle to see down the walkway, but it just wasn't possible. All I saw was crimson rain. Suddenly, the screams of pain stopped, and only the sounds of the chant remained. Oh God, I can hear one screaming of them crying. He's saying, David's Ted. Oh God, did someone die? Sensible Mommy was talking to me through the wall. I could hear Ted talking to one further down the line, presumably David's boyfriend. I sat on the bed and tried to listen as Helen pressed herself against the wall to hear it better. He says, the red came and got him. He's babbling, making no sense, Helen said. I can just barely hear them. Jesus, Tom, he's begging for someone to get him out. Shh, honey. It'll be fine. Just cover your ears, okay? Sensible Mommy was talking to little Lydia. I could hear them cuddled together on the bed in my mind's eye. I could see them cuddled together on the bed in my mind's eye, talking to a wall, confused and scared. Then the screams started again. Even through the family's room, I could hear him loud and clear, begging for help and scrambling around his room like a madman. I could hear things breaking as he desperately tried to get away from something in a locked room with no way out. The girl and her mom next door were crying, and so were Helen and I, as we listened to the man's screams die out in pained gurgling as he begged for us to help him out. The next few minutes were a mix of confusion, fear, and desperate attempts at escape. The chanting continued over the hidden PA system as Helen slammed her fist against the window, shouting for help. I could hear Tom from next door doing the same thing, just kicking fruitlessly at an unyielding door. I sat on the bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts swirling around and trying desperately to find a place to land. I had never heard anything like the sound of those two men dying, and my brain didn't seem capable of processing it. I wonder what movie they watched, I said, just loud enough for Helen to hear. My thoughts had picked a strange place to land. Helen stopped her pounding on the window and came over to my bed. What? She knelt down in front of me. What the hell are you talking about? I met one of them outside. His name was David, and he and his boyfriend were gonna watch a movie. I looked up from the floor and met her eyes. I wonder what the last movie they watched was. Tom, Helen collected herself, realizing she needed help. She needed to help me get myself together. Tom, snap out of it. I know what your brain is doing right now, running in circles. I need you right now, though. We have to find a way out of this fucking room. Her words barely had time to sink in when we heard a new sound from next door. Teddy and his wife suddenly started shouting through the wall to get our attention. Something is coming through the wall, Ted shouted. I could hear the whole family talking and shouting. What the hell is it? Helen got up from kneeling in front of me and ran over to our wall to hear well. What do you mean? It's coming through the wall. Jesus Christ, I don't know. Sensible Mommy was crying as she yelled. I could hear her go back to comforting Lydia, telling her not to look at it. The sound of the family's panic suddenly went wild. Sobs were replaced by screams and shouts for help. Ted was telling his wife and daughter to get as far back from it as they could. I heard them bump along our shared wall as they reached and as they attempted to move away. Helen lost it in that moment and looked down at me with wild, tear-filled eyes before grabbing the brass lamp off the nightstand and ripping its cord from the wall. She started using it like a hammer in an attempt to break a hole in the wall. "We have to help them!" Helen shouted at me. "Tom, the fuck up and help me! We have to do something to help them!" I heard Ted scream in pain as whatever they were trying to avoid finally got to him. The sound of Lydia screaming for her father, as I could only assume she was watching him die, finally snapped me out of my trance, and I grabbed one of the broken chair legs to help my wife smash a hole in the wall. We tore through the wallpaper, stucco, and drywall with our makeshift tools in a rhythm that made quick work of our side of the wall. Helen slammed the lamp against one of the crossbeams, and it bounced off, nearly hitting me. Head screams were suddenly cut off, and sensible Mommy must have gone into pure protection mode. There was no more screaming or crying as she realized what we were trying to do, and we heard her start smashing something against the wall on her side. The hole on our side might be just big enough to squeeze Lydia through, the crossbeams being the only thing that worried me. Suddenly, a hole opened up on sensible Mommy's side too, and their room came into view. Directly in front of us was the woman I'd seen in the restaurant, her face now pale and streaked with tears. She worked furiously to tear through the wall, like a trapped animal doing whatever it took to protect its young. Over her shoulder, I saw something far more disturbing. There was a mass of red that looked almost like moss, except it pulsed and breathed as it moved closer and closer to them. It had covered most of their room, and I could tell they didn't have anywhere to go but through. Offshoots like vines shot out, groping blindly and sticking to whatever they touched as it crept closer. The worst part was that what was sticking out of the center of the crimson mass. It was Ted, his body half melted. His skin was mostly sloughed off, and the crimson was crawling all over what meat was left. His ruined body still reached out for its family, a hand outstretched toward his wife as she desperately tried to escape. My eyes met hers, only for a second, but it was enough to crush me inside. I worked just as furiously as she and Helen to make enough room to get them through, and I wanted to find a way out of that fucking room. I needed to find a way out of that fucking room. Arnie, it's really close. The terror apparent in Lydia's voice sent chills down my spine. There was no way we made enough of a hole to fit the mother through, and it was dubious as to whether Lydia would fit. Still, we worked furiously, portions of the wall falling away and piling at our feet. Those damn support beams made the amount of space available for anyone to squeeze through minimal. "Okay," the mother said, stopping her work suddenly. "It's too close. Please, please take my daughter. Get her out of here, however you can." "No!" Helen screamed, still smashing her lamp against the wall. "We're all getting out of here. It's too close. I need to help get Lydia through. If it gets me before I do, we'll both die." Her eyes were filled with tears as she lifted her daughter and told her to climb through the hole. The look of abject terror on the child's innocent face was enough to send tears streaming through my eyes. Helen and I both reached through and took her hands. Celia tried her best to squeeze into the hole. I could hear her mother speaking behind her. "Go, honey. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be—" Her words turned into screams, and Lydia followed suit. The girl was kicking and screaming as I heard her mother flailing wildly behind her and shouting. Lydia screamed for her mother as Helen and I worked together to try and pull her into our room. "It hurts, Mommy, it hurts!" She was stuck and yelling for her dying mom. It was too much to bear, and I felt like my heart was going to beat out of my chest. "Paul, Tom!" Helen was screaming at me. He's fucking trying. She's stuck!" The mother's screams turned into wet choking sounds and gurgles, just like everyone who had been caught before her, and the creeping crimson mass had nearly finished its meal. It would undoubtedly be looking for the next. "You're hurting me!" Lydia screamed. "It's okay, honey. Just a little more." Helen tried to sound something soothing, but her voice was filled with panic. She wasn't moving, and suddenly something was pulling her in the other direction. Lydia was no longer screaming words, just screaming. In my head, I remembered the first time I saw her pretending to fly around in the restaurant. Her shyness, her sweet demeanor. Now here she was, stuck in a wall screaming as something I could barely wrap my brain around pulled her toward it to be dissolved into a pile of bones. Oh God, Tom, she's going the other way. It's got her. It's fucking got her. I know. Just keep pulling. Don't give up. The growls of Helen's and my efforts mixed with Lydia's screams of pain. Suddenly, the girl came free, and we fell backward onto the floor. I looked up first and was shocked into silence by what I saw, made all the worse by the dim red light that shone through the window. You're going to be okay, honey. You're going to be okay. Helen hadn't looked up yet, and she hadn't noticed the girl was no longer crying or screaming. I tried to tell her as she lay there with her arms wrapped around the little girl's body, but the words were stuck in my throat. When Helen finally sat up and opened her eyes, she looked down and saw what had caused me to freeze in my spot on the floor in terror. Lydia's lower half was gone, and patches of crimson tendrils were stuck to what was left. Helen's screams and tears came free more freely than my own. We both staggered against the far wall as the tendrils consumed what was left of Lydia's body. I turned away, unable to watch what was happening. My mind tried to focus on something else other than the sound of her body dissolving less than 2 feet away from me. I scanned the room for anything that could help us get out, anything at all. The chanting was making it hard to focus. With each loop, it seemed to get just a tiny bit louder, and at this point, it was like being at a shitty rock concert. It's coming through the wall! Helen gripped my shoulder and twisted me to see the slime pouring through the hole we'd made, and the vine-like tendrils reaching through and sticking to the wall with an audible thwack. I returned to scanning the room, and as soon as my eyes landed on Helen's hairspray, I felt a click in my brain. I hunted around my pockets for my cigarette lighter, and once I felt it in the palm of my hand, I grabbed Helen by the wrist and dragged her with me to grab the spray can. I hope this works like in the fucking movies. My palms were sweaty as I pulled the lighter from my pocket when I flicked it as though it was going to fly out of my hand. It took 2 tries for the spark to become a flame, but once it was there, I aimed the hairspray can behind it and walked toward the spreading mass of red hell. I pressed down, and the scream of hairspray caught the flame, setting a jet of fire forward. But the range was short, and it didn't touch any of the thing. But the range was short, and it didn't touch any of the thing that was starting to cover the whole wall between us and our former neighbors. I started to walk closer, and Helen, who'd been gripping my arm like a vice, suddenly let go and started rummaging through my bag. I got within range of the thing and tried again to douse it in flame. This attempt was more successful. I watched as the fire licked against the wall, burning away the wallpaper and searing the spreading red mass to a charred black. In the dim orange glow of my makeshift flamethrower, a small smile must have crossed my face as my heart filled with a feeling of justice, no matter how small. It was quickly replaced with fear as the thing made a sound. It screamed. Not like a human being would scream, mind you. It was more ethereal. It echoed what sounded like 1,000 voices through the walls, and it made it seem like it was all around us. It even drowned out the horrid chanting. I nearly dropped my makeshift weapon to cover my ears, but I managed to endure. Helen, on the other hand, stopped her search and clasped her hands over her ears to protect her from the hideous noise. "Keep going!" she screamed. "Get closer to the door!" I watched her take her hands off her ears and grit her teeth as she returned back to tearing through my luggage, hunting for something. I looked back to see the wall in flames, but the tendrils still spread out. They started to cover the floor in that disgusting, pulsing moss. I pressed down on the aerosol can again and started to cover as much of it as I could see in fire. The screaming sound continued, and Helen and I did our best to press it out. I had to step over what was left of Lydia to get to the other side, and next to the door. I pointed the flame down and burned the now gorging mass of tendrils and moss that had covered her. I apologized under my breath as I backed up closer to the door. Helen suddenly raised her hand up, and in it I saw a yellow canister of lighter fluid, the stuff I used to refill my Zippo. She ran over to me and started squirting the flames onto the wall and onto the bed and the wall. It burned brighter for a few seconds as the room started to fill with a horrid stench. I I then realized we were stuck in a burning room as my eyes started to sting from the smoke that rose up all around us. The door! Helen shouted as if trying to explain how we were going to get out. She sprayed the door down with lighter fluid, as much as what was left in the canister. I caught onto her lead and turned toward the door with my makeshift flamethrower and set it ablaze. The lighter fluid helped the wood catch quickly as Helen ran to the bathroom and started soaking towels in water. I looked over at her while she worked, her mind going a mile a minute in survival mode. I mouthed the words, "I love you," and and saw her make a brief, terrified smile before she mouthed them back. A tendril flew back from the flames and landed against my leg before Helen finished with what she was doing. My leg erupted in pain as I watched it touch me, and, and I screamed my lungs out before turning my flamethrower onto the grasping thing. I burnt my own leg as I torched it free, but the feeling of the fire was nothing compared to the way the crimson set my nerves alight. I could smell my own flesh burning, and it was preferable to being taken by that thing. A few more tendrils groped blindly for me, landing with audible smacks against the dresser and the window. Ellen dodged them as she ran back toward me with two wet towels in her arms. She threw one over me and then leaned down and kissed me. Bust that fucking door, Tom. The thing's screams felt like they were going to make my ears bleed, and I stared at the burning hotel room door like a rival. I pulled the soaking wet towel around me and crossed it over my face like I was doing an impression of classic Dracula. I could feel Helen behind me, wrapped in a towel of her own, and ready to follow me through the hole I was hopefully going to make. I looked back toward the shared wall, and it was covered in a mixture of the crimson mass and flames that now licked up toward the ceiling. The fire was spreading fast, and we had no choice but to try and bust through the door. If the crimson didn't consume us, the fire would, and either was only moments away. I got into a runner's stance and took one last look back at Helen, whose face held a stern yet encouraging look, as if to say, "You can do this," and "You better fucking do this," at the same time. I lowered my head, trying to get it clear of the smoke, and took a deep breath. The air was hot and stunk like boiling blood. I let the burning breath out and charged forward, putting all my weight into my shoulder. I lowered my head as I struck the flaming door and felt it splinter apart despite more resistance than I was hoping for. I went spilling through the hole in a dive and rolled off the walkway out into the rain. I threw the towel off and scrambled back toward the door as I tried to stand. My hands were outstretched for Helen as I saw her make a rush toward the hole I'd made. She leapt through the fire with her head down, much like I had, but suddenly fell flat on the surface of the walkway. I heard her crash down hard. It looked as if she'd been dragged down mid-jump. I ran over to her, and as I reached down to help her up, I saw the red tendrils embedded in her leg. More fire out of the hole in the door, and just beyond it, I could see a great flaming mass rise up and take ownership of the scream that had been permeating throughout the hotel. Ellen tried to get to her feet, but the thing started dragging her backward. She wrapped her arms around me tight, as I did the same to her, refusing to let go. "The sacrifice must be completed!" I heard someone yell from the direction of the lobby. I quickly looked to see the chubby hotel manager Otis waddling toward us with a knife in his hand. The sight would have been almost humorous under any other circumstance. But as he got closer, I realized I couldn't hold Helen and fend off that little fat monster at the same time. Everything that happened next happened too fast for me to even do anything in reaction. "Look what you've done to my hotel!" Otis screamed as he lunged forward with the blade. Helen looked me in the eyes for one brief moment, and I knew what she was going to do. God help me, I knew. She released her grip on me, and I tried my best to hold on. I was dragged a few inches across the rain-slick wood walkway as the crimson pulled her back toward the room. I felt the knife come down and strike my arm, causing me to recoil in pain and lose my grip. I suddenly fell backward off the walkway from momentum. Helen quickly grabbed the fat little monster by the collar, and I tried to run back over to them. I was too late, though, as the crimson pulled Helen's legs with one quick motion, and Helen held firm to Otis's collar. Reached out for her as I watched them both vanish into the flames of the room. I could hear Otis screaming in sheer and absolute pain as the thing devoured him or the fire burned him. I'm not sure which. My wife, on the other hand, my strong wife, my beautiful Helen, didn't scream. The creature howled in either triumph or pain as the red light, as the room started to collapse down around it. I sat under the red neon light of the no vacancy sign. The no very clearly lit up to keep people away from here while Otis was performing his sacrifice. The chanting still playing through the unburnt speakers in the other rooms was still slowly winding down as the rain pelted my skin. The fire spread quickly throughout the hotel as I watched. I stood in the rain for hours and watched it burn to the ground. Da da da.